The sun was high and the air was dry in a small quiet town surrounded by dusty roads and green hills. Kelechi, a poor fruit seller, stood by his wooden stall under the shade of a mango tree. His hands were rough from years of hard work, but his smile was gentle. Every morning he pushed his old wheelbarrow filled with oranges and bananas to the same spot, hoping to sell enough to buy a small meal for himself at the end of the day. He didn't have much in life, but he had peace. The townspeople knew him as the man who always greeted everyone kindly, even when he had nothing to eat. That afternoon the heat was stronger than usual, and the streets were empty. Kelechi sat quietly, wiping sweat from his forehead, when he noticed a young woman walking slowly toward his stall. She looked tired, her clothes dusty, her face pale. She stopped and leaned against a nearby post, breathing heavily. "Sir," she said weakly, "please, do you have a little water?" Kelechi quickly reached for his small flask, the one he saved for himself, and handed it to her. "Here, take it," he said softly. The woman drank gratefully, then looked down embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I lost my bag on the bus. My money, my ID, everything is gone." Kelechi nodded slowly. He had seen hunger before, he knew what it looked like. He reached into the pocket of his torn shirt and pulled out a single coin, the last money he had for the day. It was supposed to buy him some rice for dinner, but he didn't hesitate. "Take this," he said. "It's not much, but it can help you get some food." The woman stared at him in shock. "But, you need this more than I do." Kelechi smiled. "Maybe. But hunger doesn't wait for tomorrow. You need it now." Tears filled her eyes as she accepted the coin. She used it to buy a small meal from a nearby shop and ate slowly, watching Kelechi from afar. He had gone back to arranging his fruits as if nothing happened. When she finished, she returned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't need to," Kelechi replied gently. "Just help someone else when you can." The woman smiled faintly. "I'll never forget this," she promised. "My name is Amara." He nodded. "Safe travels, Amara." As she walked away, Kelechi didn't know that those few simple words, and that one small act of kindness, would change both their lives forever. Later that evening, as the sun sank below the hills, Kelechi packed up his unsold fruits and pushed his barrow back home. His wooden house stood on the edge of the town, small and quiet, with a leaking roof and a single window. Inside, he placed his basket on the floor and sat by the flickering lantern. His stomach growled, but his heart felt strangely full. He thought about the woman's face, the surprise, the tears, the soft smile. It had been years since anyone had looked at him with such gratitude. He whispered to himself, "Maybe kindness brings its own food." Then he closed his eyes and rested. Outside, the night breeze carried the sound of crickets, and the stars blinked softly above his small home. Somewhere far down the road, Amara walked toward the bus station, holding on to the hope that life might still be kind. She couldn't stop thinking about the poor fruit seller who gave away his last coin without asking anything in return. When she reached the bus, she looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "One day I'll find him again." Back in the small town, Kelechi lay on his straw mat, drifting into sleep with a quiet smile. He didn't know that this simple act, giving a coin to a stranger, would one day return to him in a way he could never imagine. He dreamed of better days, not of wealth but of peace, of a world where kindness mattered more than money. For Kelechi, giving was never about having. It was about believing that even the smallest act could make someone's world brighter. And that night, though his belly was empty, his heart was completely full. That was how it began. A poor man, a single coin, and a promise carried away by the wind. Years passed slowly, like the wind moving through the dry leaves of the little town. Kelechi's days were no longer as bright as they once were. The market where he used to sell fruits, the one filled with laughter and color, was now quiet and empty. A new shopping mall had been built far away, and most of his customers had moved there. The wooden stall he had built with his own hands stood abandoned at the corner of the road, its paint fading and boards cracking under the sun. Kelechi tried to hold on to hope. Each morning he would wake before sunrise, wash his face with cold water from a bucket, and whisper a short prayer. He believed that as long as he could still work and still give, life would one day smile on him again. But work was hard to find. Sometimes he would go from house to house, offering to carry heavy loads or clean yards just to earn a few coins. Even on the hardest days when he had no food left and his stomach growled with hunger, Kelechi never lost his kindness. He would see hungry children near the road and give them his bread. He would help old women carry water from the well. The neighbors often asked him why he cared so much for others when he himself had so little. Kelechi would smile and say, because one day someone will need me to be kind again. At night, when the world was silent, he sometimes thought about the young woman he had helped years ago, the one who had looked lost and tired, standing in front of his stall. He still remembered her soft voice and the way her eyes filled with gratitude when he gave her his last coin. Her name, Amara, was still clear in his mind. He wondered if she ever thought of him, if she had found her way safely. Little did Kelechi know, far away in the bustling city, Amara's life had changed in ways he could never imagine. After that day in the small town, she had made it her mission to work hard and change her destiny. She started by finding a small job at a local bakery. Every morning she would sweep the floors, clean the tables, and help bake bread. The owner noticed her dedication and began teaching her how to manage the shop. Amara saved every bit of money she earned. She studied business at night using borrowed books and free online lessons. When she faced challenges, she remembered the poor fruit seller who had given her his last coin, even when he had nothing. That memory gave her strength. She used to tell herself, if a man with so little could still give, then I have no excuse to stop trying. Years went by, and her effort began to bloom like flowers after rain. Amara started her own small bakery with just one oven and a few bags of flour. At first she struggled. The customers were few, and many days she went home tired and worried. But she refused to give up. She worked long hours trying new recipes, greeting customers with warmth, and keeping her shop clean and welcoming. People began to notice her hard work. Her bakery slowly grew popular. Soon she opened another one and then another. Within a few years, Amara's business became one of the most trusted names in the city. She expanded into making packaged snacks and bread for schools and supermarkets. Her honesty and kindness won her many friends and business partners. She began employing people from poor backgrounds, giving them fair pay and respect. Amara had become a symbol of hope. She was no longer the lost girl who once begged for help. She had become a strong, respected woman. Yet deep inside her heart, she never forgot where her story had changed. She remembered the dusty road, the humble stall, and the gentle man who had smiled at her even when he had nothing to eat. One evening, Amara sat in her office looking out of the window at the city lights. She had just signed a big deal that would make her company grow even more. But instead of celebrating, her thoughts drifted back to Kelechi. "Where is he now?" she whispered. "Is he well? Does he still sell fruits?" She felt a sudden ache in her chest, a longing to find the man who had once saved her when she had no one. Meanwhile, Kelechi's struggles continued. His clothes were worn and his shoes had holes, but he still carried himself with quiet dignity. One rainy evening he sat under a tree waiting for the storm to stop. The few fruits he had left were soaked, but he still offered one to a hungry child passing by. "Take it," he said softly. "I'll find another." The child smiled and ran off happily, and that smile made Kelechi feel warm inside, even as the rain soaked through his thin shirt. The town around him was changing. New buildings were being built, new faces were moving in, but Kelechi still lived in his old house made of mud and wood. Some people pitied him, others ignored him. But he never grew bitter. He often said, "What I give is never lost. It will come back in ways I may not see." One morning as the sun rose over the hills, Kelechi walked to the market square hoping to find some work unloading vegetables from a truck. As he walked, he passed by a group of young men talking about a powerful businesswoman from the city who had built schools and donated food to poor villages. "Her name is Amara," one of them said. "They say she came from a poor background, but now she helps everyone." Kelechi stopped for a moment. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't believe it was the same Amara he had met years ago. He smiled to himself and whispered, "If that's her, then she kept her promise." He didn't know that Amara was already searching for him. She had sent people to different towns, asking if anyone knew a fruit seller named Kelechi. She wanted to find him, not to thank him with words, but to change his life the way he had once changed hers. The world had turned many times since that day, but fate was preparing to bring their paths together again. Both of them had kept kindness alive in their hearts, and soon, that kindness would lead to something neither of them could have imagined. Kelechi didn't know it yet, but the woman he once helped was returning, not as a lost traveler this time, but as a powerful woman whose heart still carried the memory of a single act of love. The morning sun rose softly over the village, painting the sky with gentle colors of gold and pink. The air was calm and the streets were quiet, just like any other day. Children played near the well, women carried baskets of cassava, and men prepared to go to the fields. But that peaceful morning was about to become unforgettable. Suddenly, the sound of car engines echoed from the dusty road that led into the village. The people stopped what they were doing and looked up. It wasn't just one car, it was a long line of shiny black vehicles that sparkled in the sunlight. No one in the village had ever seen such cars before. Dust rose behind them as they came closer and finally stopped in the center of the village. The car doors opened and several people in neat suits stepped out. They looked around as if searching for someone. Then from the biggest car a woman stepped out slowly. Her heels touched the earth softly, and her elegant blue suit stood out against the simple huts and red soil. Her presence was calm but powerful. Was Amara. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering who she was. Some thought she was a government official. Others said she must be a celebrity. But Amara's eyes were not on them. She was searching for one face, one man she had never forgotten. She walked up to a group of villagers and spoke gently, "Please, can anyone tell me where to find a man named Kelechi? He used to sell fruits by the roadside." The people looked surprised. One woman pointed toward a narrow path that led to the edge of the village. "Kelechi lives there near the big tree," she said. "But he doesn't sell fruits anymore. Times have been hard for him." Amara nodded with a small smile of gratitude. She turned to her driver and said, "Please take me there." As the cars followed slowly down the dusty path, the villagers trailed behind curiously, whispering to one another. At the end of the path stood a small wooden hut. The roof was patched with old metal sheets, and smoke rose from a tiny fire outside. Under the shade of a tree sat Kelechi, peeling an orange and sharing it with two hungry children. His shirt was old, his shoes worn, but his smile was warm. Amara stopped and watched him for a moment. Her eyes filled with emotion. This was the same man who had given her everything when he had nothing. She remembered that day so clearly, the smell of fruit, the sound of the wind, and his kind voice telling her not to worry. Kelechi looked up, curious as the car stopped near his hut. It wasn't every day that rich people came down his road. He stood up slowly, brushing dust from his hands. When Amara stepped out, he didn't recognize her at first. To him, she looked like someone from another world, elegant, confident, and shining with success. She smiled softly and walked closer. "Are you Kelechi?" she asked. He nodded politely. "Yes, madam. How can I help you?" Amara's smile deepened and her voice softened. "You once helped me," she said. "Years ago, you gave me your last coin so I could buy food when I had nothing." Kelechi froze. The orange in his hand fell to the ground. For a moment he thought he had misheard. Then he looked closely at her face. Behind the fine clothes and the confident smile, he saw the same eyes, the same kind, grateful eyes of the young woman he had helped years ago. His lips trembled. "It's you," he whispered. "Amara?" She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, it's me." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The past and the present met in silence. The villagers watched in awe as Amara, the rich woman, stepped closer and bowed slightly to the poor man. "You changed my life," she said quietly. "I came back to thank you." Kelechi didn't know what to say. He looked around, embarrassed by his small house and worn clothes. "I only did what anyone should do," he said humbly. "You were hungry. I just helped." Amara shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "You gave me hope when I had none. That one act of kindness gave me strength to build everything I have today." Her assistants began unloading boxes from one of the cars, boxes filled with food, clothes, and supplies for the whole village. The children's eyes widened with joy as they saw the gifts. But Amara wasn't done. She turned back to Kelechi and said, "I have something special for you." She handed him a brown envelope. His hands shook as he opened it and saw papers inside, documents with his name written on them. He looked confused. "What is this?" he asked softly. "It's your new home," Amara said with a smile. "And a fruit shop in the city. You will never have to struggle again." Kelechi's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak but the words caught in his throat. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "You do," she said firmly. "You gave when you had nothing. Now it's my turn." He looked at her with disbelief, his heart full. The villagers began clapping, moved by what they were seeing. Some had tears in their eyes too. They had known Kelechi's kindness all their lives, but now they saw how far a single act of goodness could reach. Amara asked if she could step inside his home. He nodded quickly, cleaning a wooden chair for her to sit on. Inside the small hut, she looked around quietly. The walls were bare, but everything was clean and neatly arranged. On a shelf, she noticed an old piece of newspaper wrapped around something. Out of curiosity, she asked, "What's this?" Kelechi smiled shyly. "That's the small blanket the young woman left behind the day I met her. I kept it as a reminder, to never stop helping others. Amara's throat tightened. She touched the cloth gently. You kept it all these years? He nodded. It reminded me that sometimes one good thing can change everything. They sat together talking for a long time, about life, struggles, and dreams. Kelechi listened proudly as Amara told him about her company, her travels, and how she built schools for children from poor families. Every time she spoke, he saw not just her success but her heart, the same heart he had once seen in a lost, hungry girl. When it was time to leave, Amara stood up and said softly, "This is not goodbye. I'll be back. You are part of my story now, and I will never forget you again." Kelechi smiled through his tears. "You already repaid me 1,000 times over," he said. "Seeing you happy is enough." But Amara shook her head. "No," she replied warmly. "This is only the beginning." As she walked back to her car, the villagers waved and cheered. Kelechi stood there watching her leave, his heart full of peace and gratitude. The world, he realized, was round, what you give always comes back. And that day, under the soft morning sun, he knew that kindness had not only changed her life, it had changed his too. The golden light of the afternoon sun streamed softly through the trees as Amara and Kelechi sat under the same big tree that shaded his small hut. A gentle wind blew, carrying the sound of birds and the laughter of children playing nearby. It was quiet, but in that silence something powerful was happening, a story of kindness coming full circle. Amara looked at Kelechi with eyes full of warmth and respect. "Kelechi," she said softly, "that small act of kindness you showed me long ago changed my entire life." Kelechi frowned slightly, still confused by how his small gesture could have meant so much. "It was just a coin," he said humbly. "I only gave you a little money for food." Amara smiled, shaking her head gently. "No," she said, "it was more than a coin. It was hope. That day I was lost, tired, and ready to give up. Everyone I met turned away. But you, someone who had nothing, chose to help me. You didn't ask who I was or what I could give in return. You gave because your heart was kind." Kelechi looked down, embarrassed by her praise. "I only did what I thought was right," he said quietly. Amara's voice softened even more. "Sometimes," she said, "one good thing done with a pure heart can change the world in ways you never imagine." She reached into her bag and took out a brown envelope. She handed it to him with both hands, smiling. "I want you to see something," she said. Kelechi hesitated before opening it. Inside were official documents, neat pages with stamps and seals, filled with his name written clearly on each line. He blinked, confused, and looked up at her. "What is this?" he asked. Amara took a deep breath, her smile widening. "That," she said, "is ownership of a fruit company, your company." For a moment, Kelechi didn't understand. He looked again at the papers, his heart pounding. "My company?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," Amara said proudly. "A big fruit company in the city. I built it years ago and I've now placed it under your name. From today you are the owner." Kelechi's mouth fell open. His hands began to tremble as he looked at her in disbelief. "No, no," he said quickly, shaking his head. "This is too much, Amara. I cannot accept this. I didn't help you to get anything back. I just did what any person should do." Amara smiled kindly. "I know," she said. "That is exactly why you deserve it. You gave when you had nothing. You shared kindness without expecting anything. Now I want to give back, not because you asked but because you inspired me." Kelechi's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak but his voice broke. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "How can I ever thank you for this?" Amara reached out and touched his hand gently. "You already did," she said. "That day you taught me something no school or book ever could. You taught me what real kindness is. When I started my business I built it with that same spirit, helping others, giving people jobs and spreading hope. Everything I have today started with you." He looked at her in silence, still overwhelmed. The papers in his hand shook slightly. Around them, the villagers began to gather again, watching curiously. Word had already spread that Amara was back in the village. Now they saw her sitting under the tree with Kelechi, both of them smiling with tears in their eyes. Amara turned to face the small crowd and said loudly, "This man saved me once when no one else would. His kindness gave me a new beginning. Today I want to give him one too." The villagers gasped. Some began to clap softly. Others looked at Kelechi in awe. Everyone in the village knew him as a good man, humble, honest, and hard-working, but no one had ever imagined this moment. Kelechi stood up slowly, still in shock. "Amara," he said softly, "I don't need a company. I'm just a simple man. I don't know how to run big businesses. Amara laughed gently. Then you will learn, she said. And I will help you. I'm not just giving you a company, I'm giving you an opportunity, a chance to live the life you deserve. She called her assistant over, who handed Kelechi another folder. Inside were photos of the company building, a tall, beautiful structure in the city, with shining glass windows and the name, Kelechi Fresh Fruits Limited written proudly on the front. Kelechi stared at it in disbelief. He had spent his life selling fruits by the roadside, never dreaming that one day his name would be on a building like that. Amara continued, the company is successful, but it needs someone with a good heart to lead it. Someone who knows what honesty and hard work mean. I can think of no one better than you. He took a deep breath, his heart full. You've given me more than I ever hoped for, he said softly. Amara smiled. No kindness is ever too small, she said. What you gave me may have been a single coin, but it was priceless. You gave hope to a stranger. Now I give back with everything I have. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The air was thick with emotion. Kelechi looked at the documents again, then at Amara, still unable to believe that this was real. Finally he said quietly, when I helped you that day I was afraid. I didn't know if I would have food that night. But something inside me said it was right to help you. I never knew that small act would come back like this. Amara nodded. That's the beauty of kindness, she said. It always finds its way back even when you least expect it. The villagers began cheering now, surrounding them with smiles and songs. The children danced and even the elders nodded proudly. Kelechi's eyes glistened with tears as he looked around. For the first time in many years he felt proud, not because of wealth but because his simple life had touched so many hearts. Amara turned to him once more. I've arranged a home for you in the city, she said gently. It's close to the company. You'll never have to worry about anything again. Kelechi shook his head with disbelief, still smiling. You've given me too much, he said again. Amara looked up at the sky and replied softly, No, my friend. You gave me everything first. I'm just returning what was already yours. The sun began to set behind them, painting the sky orange and red. As the light faded, Amara and Kelechi stood together, surrounded by the people whose hearts were full of joy and hope. That evening the village celebrated not just wealth, but the power of goodness. Proof that even the smallest act of compassion can grow into something far greater than anyone could imagine. The morning sun rose slowly over the little village, casting soft golden light over the dusty roads and green trees. Birds sang quietly and children ran through the fields, laughing. The air smelled faintly of fresh fruits and morning dew. Everything seemed ordinary, but for Kelechi nothing would ever be the same again. From the moment Amara had returned and given him the company, his life had changed completely. He woke each morning not with worry about what he would eat but with purpose. The company she had placed in his hands was now thriving, and Kelechi devoted himself to learning every part of it. He met with managers, helped workers, and listened carefully to everyone who had ideas. He remembered every lesson he had learned while selling fruits on the roadside, honesty, patience, and care, and he used those lessons to guide the business. At first, some of the employees were unsure about having a man who had once lived in a small hut and sold fruits on the roadside as their boss. But Kelechi's kindness and fairness quickly earned their respect. He never spoke down to anyone and he listened carefully to their needs. He made sure that everyone received fair pay and had good working conditions. He even started programs to teach young people in the city how to grow and sell fruits, just as he had once done. Meanwhile, Amara continued visiting the village often. She called Kelechi her second father, and spent time with him, laughing and sharing stories about her company and travels. The two of them became close, like family, and the villagers loved to see them together. Children would run up to Kelechi asking him questions about fruits, business, and even life. He answered every question patiently, always encouraging them to be kind and hardworking. In the village, everyone knew about the story of the last coin. They would tell it to visitors, saying, "This man, Kelechi, gave his last coin to a stranger, and that small act changed everything." Children would listen with wide eyes and parents would nod, proud of the man who had taught the village the value of kindness. Kelechi often thought about the day he had given his last coin. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet it was also like yesterday. He remembered Amara's grateful eyes and the soft voice she had used to thank him. He remembered wondering if she would ever be okay. And now, seeing her as a successful businesswoman, he realized that hope and kindness truly could travel far beyond what one could see. He had framed that last coin and placed it on a wooden shelf in his new office. It was a small golden frame, polished and bright, and Kelechi would look at it every morning. Sometimes he would smile and whisper, "It all started here with a little kindness." That coin reminded him that wealth was not only in money or buildings but in the heart, in the way people care for each other. Kelechi's business grew steadily, and he made sure it always stayed connected to the village that had raised him. He provided jobs for neighbors, helped the children with school supplies, and even built a small clinic to care for the sick. He remembered his own struggles and wanted others to have opportunities he did not have. Every success he achieved was shared with the people who had supported him, the people who had known him before he became a businessman. Amara's visits were always joyful. She would arrive in her car, carrying gifts and news about her company, and Kelechi would welcome her warmly. She would ask how the village was doing, how the children were growing, and how the company she had given him was performing. Kelechi always replied with honesty, and together they would make decisions to improve both the village and the company. The villagers often invited Amara and Kelechi to the community gatherings. At celebrations, she would speak about the importance of giving, of helping those in need, and of remembering where one came from. Kelechi would stand beside her quietly, nodding, his heart full of humility and pride. They became an example not only of business success but of human goodness. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Kelechi walked through the village square, greeting people and checking on the small market stalls. He stopped to speak with children who were selling fruits just as he once had. He taught them to smile at customers, to work honestly, and to treat everyone with respect. He shared stories about the day he gave his last coin and how one act of kindness could change a life forever. Parents listened, nodding, and children repeated his words carefully. They would whisper to each other, "We will be like Kelechi. We will be kind no matter what we have." The story became part of the village history, told again and again to remind everyone that even small actions could grow into something extraordinary. Back at his office, Kelechi would sometimes pause to look at the framed coin. He would remember the fear he had felt that day, how little he had, how much he needed, but also the choice he had made. He had given without expecting anything, and that choice had returned to him multiplied many times over. He realized that life was not about what you kept, but about what you gave. Amara would often join him in the office, bringing letters from clients or new ideas for the company. They worked together as a team, laughing and planning. Sometimes Kelechi would look at her and say, "I can't believe how far we've come." Amara would smile softly and reply, "It started with one coin, one act of kindness. That's what brought us here." The company continued to expand, reaching other towns and even neighboring cities. Kelechi ensured that every new branch of the business kept the same values he had learned in life: honesty, respect, and giving back. He hired people from poor backgrounds, taught them skills, and encouraged them to be generous and kind. Even though he was now a billionaire in the making, Kelechi remained humble. He never forgot the simple days of selling fruits by the roadside, the long walks home with empty pockets, or the nights of hunger. Those memories reminded him why he had to remain good-hearted and why he had to help others. Amara and Kelechi often visited schools together, sharing their story with students. They would tell the children, "No matter how little you have, you can make a difference. A single act of kindness can change lives forever." The children would listen, their eyes wide with wonder, imagining what they could do with even a small act of generosity. Years went by, and Kelechi became more than a businessman. He became a symbol of hope and kindness. People came from other towns to hear his story, to see the man who had given his last coin and whose life had been changed forever. Amara was always by his side, proud and grateful, knowing that without him her own life would have been very different. In the evenings, Kelechi would sit outside his home, watching the sun dip below the hills. He would hold the framed coin in his hand, turning it gently, remembering that day long ago. His heart felt light and full at the same time. He whispered, "True wealth begins with a generous heart," and smiled, thinking of Amara and all the lives that kindness had touched. The village, too, celebrated their story. Every year, they would hold a small festival in Kelechi's honor, inviting neighbors and travelers to hear how a poor man's generosity had created a ripple that touched so many lives. Children dressed in bright colors. The end.